Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the show.
Feeling good, Mike. Good morning.
This is a recorded episode, so just letting everyone know this one has been recorded, so this is not live, just in case you're looking to talk to us in the chat. We won't be there, but you're more than welcome to communicate with each other in the chats. Typically, YouTube is the most popular one. Seems like it has the most interactions going on in chat. Today's main topic will be around who owns the connection, managing your access and the chaos in your Fabric pipelines. Just kind of going through some of our experiences here. It feels like some of the connection string things have been changing, or at least permissions on who can edit them or create them or build things around the connection strings. And just kind of want to unpack this. What does it look like? Is there any tips or tricks that we're finding that are going to make this easier to manage? And maybe some opportunities here for Microsoft to kind of switch things around here a little bit. Anyways, that being said, that's our main topic for today. There's a question around this one, and then let's do a news item. Tommy, you found something around in the news.
Oh, well, it's one of our favorite products, I think, the Fabric ecosystem. It's all around Data Wrangler. And this is actually something I noticed is available in VS Code, but it's now available in the Fabric UI. And really what this allows us to do is simply use Copilot and other AI-powered capabilities in Data Wrangler. And what they actually allow us to do is one, Data Wrangler is going to provide some automated suggestions. And also you can say, hey, Copilot, I want to do X, Y, and Z to this data frame or whatever you're trying to do. Copilot will then generate the code or action that you need, the function, whatever you're trying to do, and allow that to be implemented into Data Wrangler. Mike, this is such a must needed feature that I think one puts a few of our videos already now out of commission. We got to retire them from our Let's Learn Fabric series, but more importantly, it's about time this is available.
Yes. And there's a couple of things in here. So the AI is able to kind of assist you in various areas, which I think is really interesting here. A couple of the things that I'm looking at here in this article, it's the AI pieces of this that's kind of fun. You know, you can now suggest things. You know, you can talk to it directly. Hey, I need you to parse this information out, and it will write a regex expression that will parse this information out of this sentence or line or whatnot. I've actually found really good use out of using AI to write the regex for me. I don't really know how to do it all that well. I've done a little bit. I know slightly, but the syntax is quite, I don't know. It's just complex. If you write it a lot,
different types of it too. Yeah.
Yeah. If you write a lot of it, you're good at it. But if you don't write a lot of it, I'm not as good. So yeah. I really love the AI. I mean, just the fact that you can talk to it and say, hey, I want to perform these various options or this various formatting. It will then extract text out really, really well for you that way. So that's kind of fun. Custom operations, that's kind of interesting. I don't know if I've been able to find any custom operations, but maybe custom operations in there as well. Just ask the Copilot what you want it to do, and maybe it will figure it out.
And that's exactly what's available already in VS Code. And what that allows you to do is say whatever action or operation you want to do, whatever functions, like I want to trim, I want to take the third character, I want to take these two columns. Copilot's going to automatically, what it should be doing, what it can do really well, and now it's simply available in the UI. So I am so happy to see this. It's so needed. It's just so needed.
So the other one here, kind of the end of the article that I thought was actually really interesting here is everything in the Data Wrangler experience is kind of like a pandas data frame.
Yes.
Whatever data you supply to it or wherever you find a data frame in the main portion of the notebook, it kind of takes you out of that, if you're using a PySpark data frame versus a pandas data frame, it's kind of you're jumping back and forth between two different styles of data frames. And for those of you who've done some work in notebooks, sometimes it's a bit weird or awkward to write data back and forth from lakehouse tables or read it out because you have to change it over to this format type. And so kind of the data, and while it's in memory in the notebook, does matter what kind of format that it's in. It's not just a standard data frame that works in every instance. There actually is like flavors of a data frame, I guess.
Also, importantly, when you push it actually back to a Delta table. So this is actually one of the things I wish I kind of wish I didn't start with notebooks until today, because when I first started, this was all a learning curve. And I was like, okay, everything's good. I have my data types right, date time, great. push it back to Delta table. Oh, it doesn't work because the panda's date time is different than what actually would be good for PySpark. So
Yes.
those little things that you're not aware of, you don't know. And I had all this little nice notebook code and all these cells, and then at the very end saying, no, not going to work. Different data.
Nope. Denied.
Figure it out. Denied. So this is
Mhm.
really great too that they're going to translate that for you as well. I think this is, Mike, this is all stuff that you and I both know is already available in the AI world. And it's just nice to see now in the user interface as just kind of already integrated.
Yeah, I think this is one of those nice to have features, or it just makes the experience a bit easier, more smoother for users, right? I really shouldn't. I was on a different podcast recently. I was talking with someone about this exact conversation, and I should worry more about the concepts and not necessarily the syntax, right?
Mm,
The syntax of things is like, okay, how do I write this data frame specifically for PySpark versus Pandas? I shouldn't have to care about that. Like at the end of the day, I'm just trying to remove some columns, filter some data, extract information on a row by row basis. Like Copilot should just kind of fix those things for you, and we can kind of take away some of those technical challenges. And I think we can think of it like when you work with a piece of wood, and you're designing something, you're cutting something out of the piece of wood, and there's like these sharp edges on it. I feel like Copilot right now is really sanding the edges on the chair or the table that you're making. It's making the edges a bit smoother and easier to handle instead of having like this really sharp edge on everything.
You bring up a conversation I think we may need to save for an entire episode, because if a lot of people are relying on Copilot, they don't have to worry about the syntax, but they're owning these operations.
Sure.
Well, right. So to your example with the wood, well, let's say I just hired someone out to do it. I have no idea what I'm doing, which I don't usually with anything that has to do with wood or carpentry,
Yeah.
but that's all getting done and I still own it. Well, what if something did break? Like, or are we really at a point right now where AI can do it and I don't need that technical expertise at an organization or in a team? Because it's kind of like you first think, well, someone should know what they're doing.
That's interesting,
But
Tommy. Well, do you remember high school shop class, or not even that, middle school
not
shop
me.
class? Did you go to?
They
Did you
wouldn't
ever go
allow
to shop
me
class?
in.
They wouldn't let you in. The first couple things you build are like super shoddy. Like they
Yeah.
work, but they don't work great. The edges are not quite lined. The wood pieces of wood don't go together very well. You overuse the glue when you shouldn't have used too much glue, and there's like beads of wood glue on everything. Like so I almost think of it like when you're writing code, it's kind of the same thing, right? Until you kind of learn your way around it, those first couple of projects are just going to be shoddy, not
Sure.
perfect. And that's okay. I think it's part of the learning experience. But then over time, you start learning how to craft better, right? You upgrade the skills that you're working with. You actually start buying more expensive pieces of wood because now you're not just working with pine. You're not working with like maple or I don't know, another nice wood. I don't do wood carpentry, so I couldn't tell you. But like it gets better potentially over time. So I think this is maybe the same way here, right? So the AI is. I think of it more as less of like. I think my sanding of the edges make sense here. I think the analogy still holds,
Yeah.
but I also think it might be like someone else who's there beside you, like the expert that's there also, right? Because you can ask questions of it and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
is this the right way?" Or I wrote this whole thing in again to this last statement of the blog here. I wrote all this in pandas. Could you just translate this to PySpark so it's more scalable?
Right.
Right, and then it can kind of guide you through that experience and say, here's the equivalent of what you've written. I mean, the amount of code being written in PySpark and pandas, there's an inordinate amount of that stuff. So the
Right.
AI should definitely be able to know what this is doing. And this is the stuff that I'm like, I really find AI valuable here is because I can ask it to build a component or a function or something, and it's pulling on thousands, hundreds of thousands of functions that are similar in nature and writing one that's similar. I couldn't even have read all those hundreds of thousands of
Oh
functions to
yeah.
get to a point where I would understand them all. So, anyways, this is really interesting. I like the fact that AI is coming to Data Wrangler. I think Tom, I think we both would admit here, Data Wrangler is an underrated part of the product.
Mm-hmm.
And the more places we can make it easier to just expose Data Wrangler in easy to use spaces all across the notebook experience, I think the better, honestly.
100%.
Yeah, I think it blends that world of like Power Query heavy users and then notebook and then developers in notebooks. I think it really starts letting that user experience something that feels familiar in Power Query, but now could do it in a bit more performant tool like Data Wrangler,
Right.
and then ultimately move into notebooks, which is, I think, in general, faster and costs less CUs
Completely
than running a
underutilized.
data flow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
100%.
Great article. The article will also be in the description of this video. So if you want to check out this article and read it for yourself, there actually is a really nice little YouTube video that goes along with it, Transform Your Data with AI. This whole article is written by Aaron. I believe Aaron is the PM for this product. Anyways, check it out. It's got a lot of views. This came out a while ago,
Yeah.
May 22nd. So it's been out for a couple months, but just now catching up on it. All right. That being said, Tommy, we have a mailbag today. So let's jump into our main topic today, talking more about chaos in Fabric pipelines. And give us a quick run through of the question for today.
This is exciting too, because this is one of our first mailbags we've gotten that's just Fabric focused.
100% Fabric.
Nothing else. So I'm really excited to see our 5 listeners finally getting the Fabric.
All two of you out there.
Those questions, all the 2 of them.
Exactly. Yes,
so
exactly.
Let's get into it. My team is co-creating some data pipelines in Fabric. We have run into issues with connections where one person will create a connection and then the other will not be able to access the pipeline and receive a warning message that they do not have the permissions for that connection. What is interesting is that even as a tenant admin, I could not find the connection in the manage connection sections to add myself to it.
Mm-hmm.
The other user had to go add me. How should connections be managed? Is there a way to only allow certain individuals to create connections? I feel like this is a miss by Microsoft and allows anyone to create connections and is a struggle to manage. Any advice on governing this?
This is a great question.
Yeah.
All right, Tommy. Let's start with the observation. Have you also had challenges managing connections in the same way? Someone else creates a connection, you can't see it, you can't get access to it. What's your experience here?
Well, the funny thing, first off, this is not unique to pipelines. This is something that we've also had issues with data flows Gen 1, where someone created a data flow and no one else could edit it. You actually had to overtake the data flow in order to do any modifications to it. So this same kind of idea or same kind of struggle has kind of existed throughout the Power BI lifecycle in the service. Now, pertaining especially to pipelines, yeah, this is something where it's a weird, almost feels like a bug.
Yeah, I've looked at this, and I think they've changed how the connection things typically work. I believe the connection, it feels like to me, again, observing this is how it's changed over the years, right? Initially, connections were made like in the item itself, right? So you'd make a connection inside the item, and what would happen is it would immediately check the connection properties, like when you logged in. Hey, Tommy's logging into a pipeline that was written by Mike. Well, I guess let's go back to your like data flows Gen 1 stuff as well, right? I'm trying to enter into a pipeline that I didn't have access to, right? So that's number one problem there. That way, all of my connection details could be attached to that particular pipeline. Therefore, we know. I think that's kind of why that was happening initially. Was look, you're connecting to SharePoint, you're connecting to a SQL server, whatever the database, whatever the connections are in that data flow, they were kind of owned by a person. So the whole data flow item was a single ownership. Now that you're in pipelines, like we don't really want to have single ownership on things anymore. We want, I want to be able to put anyone in the workspace who's like a member to be able to go in and see it and edit it and manage it and things like that as well. So what happened here, I think, is they disassociated the ability for you to have the connection stored inside the pipeline. And actually, if you think about this from like a continuous integration, continuous deployment space, dev, test, and prod, I mean, there's likely different connections in each of those environments, which would also require different user permissions potentially, or
Right.
permissions to the server, whatever that is. So I think the right mindset here is to disassociate the connections away from the artifacts in the workspace. The challenge becomes what happens when multiple people need to manage that.
Yeah. And the standard way of governance really around Power BI and Fabric 2 today, I know they're working on that individual permissions, but it's really the workspace permissions. That's really the de facto default way that we want to manage any permissions around governance, around data ownership, around the modifications or even viewing. And this should be no different for pipelines. If I have editabilities in a workspace, if I'm a member or contributor, well, changed a bit in our Fabric days, but that I should be able to go into any artifact and modify, because I don't need to worry about, like, for example, in a semantic model where I need build permissions if I'm not part of the data set or a part of the workspace. But again, so standard governance practices dictate that if if I have the ability to edit in a workspace, then I should be able to go into any artifact and modify it. But that's not the case here.
Yeah, and it feels like, I mean, if I had to look at what's going on here again, I'm trying to like re-articulate this into like maybe a different scenario or some. It feels like the connection itself is becoming its own item, and that item is not stored inside the workspace. The connection is an item that lives in this now connection manager, right? So the gateway and connection manager seems to be like the place where all connections live. And I would agree with, so a couple things. I've observed this very much. My observation has been, when someone creates a connection and I can't use it, what happens is I go into the pipeline, there'll be a little notice at the top that says, hey, you don't have access to all the connections, therefore you can't run this pipeline. Be aware. Okay, fine. But when I go in there, the connection is just gone. I can't see the name of it.
Yeah.
I can't see who owns it. I can't see the name. Like it's just a GUID that attaches itself to the pipeline. And I'm like, I understand there's a permission issue here, but I'm part of the workspace. Right. And I'm like, I could understand like, hey, look, I'm a viewer. Then I would understand like hiding and obfuscating the name of the connection away. But if I'm a member or contributor to the workspace, at least give me the name of the connection.
Right.
Or at least give me a link to go see the connection and see that it's owned by somebody else in the connection manager, right? So what's the harm in letting me see the connection without actually putting my permissions or credentials into it, right? So there's no like request permission button that tells you, Tommy, that I'm accessing this pipeline. I need to be added to this permission. So I guess my mindset is, because the connections are now their own objects, they're now living in this other page altogether. I feel like we need to bring that item, the connection, back into the workspace and just make a new item, just make a new artifact in the workspace. That's like a connection
more
item.
items. We need more artifacts in a workspace.
Of course we do. Well, that's what we're gonna do, Tom. We're gonna load this sucker up like all the way.
We did not have enough. So first off,
we're going on that. What was that game show that we would play when we were watching when we were kids? You'd go to like a store and they'd give you like a shopping cart and you'd have to get as much stuff into the shopping cart as you could.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, it's the crazy game where you had like 5 minutes to get 100 items, whatever.
Yeah, or something like that. Or you just here's a shopping cart. Go through this whole store and pick out anything you want. We'll buy everything in the shopping cart, or whatever that is. Anyways, it feels like we're doing that. Like just throw everything in the workspace, just put it all there. And I'm asking for one more thing, which is like the connection itself, because then I feel like you could govern the connection in the workspace two different ways. You could govern it by individual users who could access the connection. That could be one way you govern the connection. Mm-hmm. Or the alternative would be you could govern the connection by the workspace management, right? So obviously all admins would be able to see all connections in the workspace because they're an admin. Makes sense. But then you should be able to set permissions on the connection that says, who do I want to be able to edit or see the details? Only admins, members, contributors, and definitely not viewers. So like at least that way, maybe contributors can see the connection, but they can't edit it. Maybe members can edit the connection, but they can't delete it or something like that. And then admins can do everything, right? So that would be nice, because then you could leverage again the workspace user permissions against the connection And then, Tommy, when the members of the workspace show up to work on the pipeline, okay, by default, you automatically have access to all these connections. That makes more sense to bring the connections out of the connections portal page and put it in the workspace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm breaking it down in my head, and the one thing I feel like you don't want as much, I can see that, but you also don't want that to fly in the face or be a difference than any other artifact in the workspace. So, to your point, connections.
How do you mean?
Or your credentials, right? So if I have access to a gateway, right? To your point, that lives in the manage connections and gateway section, which is completely different permissions, has nothing to do with your workspace permissions or
I
what
see what you're
workspace
saying.
it lives in, right?
Mm.
And if that lives there, but then all of a sudden you have the artifacts, then you're kind of flying in the face. It gets complicated very quickly. So
Well, I guess
you
what
gotta live
you're
in one or the
describing,
other. Yeah.
I think what you're describing though is sharing connections across workspaces now becomes much more difficult because I'm
Yes.
potentially using a connection from a separate workspace that needs to be
Right.
both, and now I'm duplicating them, which kind of defeats the purpose because you want one
Right.
connection for both places. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. You know what
this
I
is the
mean? Like
hard part
then
because
it gets really complicated on how do you
how are we
actually manage in it.
that's a good point because now the question I think becomes now, how do you really want to manage the connections? Are they in fact truly global, or are they actually linked or related to the workspace? Like should they be global or should they be workspace related? Right now they're just built as global.
Right.
Anyone who has permissions and email, like email addresses attached to the work connection, they can use them in any workspace anywhere, which is nice, I think.
Right.
But
And
then you also lose, like now you have to add, I don't know,
well, so
it's hard going from
yeah,
workspace to global and then global back to
right.
workspace. Maybe that's
And
the issue
look,
that I'm
I
fighting
think
here a bit.
and this is a good point to kind of dive into, because let's break that down from how did we do governance around connections pre-fabric, which I think can stay. We can kind of apply those same kind of practices
We
today.
didn't really.
We did. If you had a gateway, so we had a
That's
team.
true.
Yeah,
Okay,
and with
I'll step
gateways
back on my statement.
especially, yeah.
Gateways were the way to manage that connection string.
Right. Right. So with gateways, that was really the de facto way to do it. Because again, with
Okay.
data flows, the difference was you weren't managing, it had nothing to do with connections. That was the
Yep.
artifact that you could not manage or go into. But
Yes.
connections, if I'm in any workspace and I have a connection to, let's say, the e-commerce database, whatever it is, any semantic model that I create in any workspace, as long as I have the permissions in the connections area to access that, I can connect that semantic model to the gateway and I can access the gateway because of it. So, and that worked. To me, that was a global way because you're more than likely going to use connections across workspaces. It's just one of those things. You're going to have your overlapping databases, lake houses, whatever it may be, is going to more than likely touch more than one workspace. So that makes sense to me. Now, as we kind of wrap this in the more complication of fabric, the problem gets into pipelines are very different than semantic models because you're in the process of modifying or creating something or writing back. So you do want a little extra permissions too. So I don't know if you're seeing that difference there where anything I was doing with the gateway, I was just accessing to refresh. I was not modifying, I was not creating. I was only using it to refresh to get the new data. However, if I do this in a pipeline, if I have connections, well, then I have the ability, if I have access to connections, to modify, edit, or in a sense, delete something that exists. So I
Not
really don't want that to be managed the same.
not always. I think if you go into the pipeline, you can give people like use access on a connection, but not edit access on a connection. So I mean, to your point, Tommy, like you're like, one of the things that we had in the gateway, which was there were people who were setting up connections on the gateway, but
Right.
there was like the person setting the connection. There's credentials that were being used. Those credentials could be used in like a service account. So a service account could be attached to them,
Another
so it's
good
not
one. Yeah.
specifically linked to a user. But users used the connection, right? Users
Right.
had the permission to so what user is allowed to edit the connection, what user is allowed to use these connections, and that's the permissions they had on the gateway. I think they're mirroring that same experience now inside the portal page with connections, which is there are people that can edit it and there are people that can use it. So you can use and edit the connection the same way. And I'm just gonna I have to double check that statement just to make sure that I'm at the log in here real quick. So I'll log into Fabric real quick just to confirm that in that gateway connection management, manage connections screen, you can have people use connections as well as the ability to edit or manage them as well. But that being said, I do agree with you, Tommy. The way we've managed these things in the past is different now. And going back to our question from the mailbag, so I do want to make sure that we kind of address and answer specifically the questions. One is, how should connections be managed? And then, is there a way to only let certain individuals create connections? And I'm going to go back to this one. What have you seen any good practices in this new connection management way, Tommy? Have you seen anything that has emerged in your experience that is a good practice that you would like to leverage within connections?
Nothing that can, to me, that can be applied universally. Nothing that I think that you could say you could stamp at every organization. It has been to this point pretty custom, pretty based on that team and their structure. Because right now, to me, that managed connections and from an governance point of view, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles and features that you would want that I can apply to any organization with any type of structure. And that's where I think we're running into questions like this.
Mm-hmm. So let me go in a couple layers here, right? So how should connections be managed? I think there's a difference between users who are just ad hoc making reports and like connecting to SharePoint and bringing files in and maybe even connecting to a SQL server. I think there's a difference between that and I'm going to be building some central IT reporting that's going to be managed by a larger team, right? If you're a small team of individuals that are building things, I think you manage connections differently than if you're a larger team. Because the idea is we're going to need to hand off permissions to other people potentially. And in larger teams, they kind of fluctuate a little bit. Some people come in, some people go out, right? So I'm going to look at this two different ways, right? On the smaller side of the teams of things, it would be nice to have coordination between your individuals, but I think you're going to have a hard time getting everyone to align to the same thing. There's a bit of, again, back to this other question, is there any way to only allow certain individuals to create connections? Not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of anything that will then refuse the connection creation screen for individual users, which would be nice because then you could really control this and say, look, if we don't establish the connection and we don't hand it out to you, then you can't use it. Well, then that kind of defeats most of the purpose of Power BI, doing your own things, making your own connections, creating your own data, marts or whatever you want to call it, right? That kind of defeats the purpose here. So I don't think that's the right answer. However, what I would say is, as your team starts growing, I do think that having security groups is another good place here. We talk about a lot of security groups at the workspace level. There's other things you may need to have access to the security group. So this is where I think when you're starting to talk about more centrally managed or when people are accessing information, it's more important here to manage things at the security group level. Now, what I will admit here is, let's think about the process here. I'm just going to kind of unpack the process, right? So we make a workspace. It's going to be a team of people that are going to work in this workspace. So we already know we're going to need to build security groups for member, contributor, maybe even admin. Maybe the admin just gets their name on it. I don't know. We'll just see, right? I don't know how big your organization is, right? So in that situation, we're already creating security groups for different member levels of people. In the connection string space, I can create the connection, but me as the user, it's very important for me to attach not just me, but also the security group onto that connection. Right. Then anyone who's a part of the security group can then manage the connection. Right. So to me, that's where I think things should go. Okay, I'll pause right there.
Here's what I'm hearing, and I think I've really come to this conclusion. A lot of situations that we have like this, and this is not the only one, but let's be honest, to that managed connection string, it's messy, it's ugly. It works, but it usually works for a single admin. And what I think we're trying to do here is we're trying to have a technology solution to a process problem. That to me is really where we're at. You can do security groups. You can create an app that has some API that connects, that has a managed screen connection. But all of this is, I don't think this is a technology solution we're looking for. And how do we actually answer this question? Or more importantly, how do we solve this question or this problem? This is a process thing. And this is really something that the technology alone is not going to solve for you. And this is why you're dealing with a few things where we don't have the features available that you would want to manage this in an automated fashion. That does not exist. If I'm already working in a team and I'm creating connections, to me, honestly, there should be a process in place to the person who asked this mailbag. If I'm working in a team already in a single workspace where I know I'm going to edit something with you, let's say you and I are part of the same pipeline, we're working on the same things. Well, if I'm creating a connection or a pipeline and I'm not making sure that the first thing I do is give you access to that or the team access to that, I think that's a penalty on me, to be honest. That's a problem on my end, not the technology's end. We don't have a technological solution or features available to solve this for us. We don't. We don't. So honestly, this should be something that's implemented on you and I as the workspace, the contract that you and I write together. It's like, hey, I'm creating a pipeline. It's going to go through our normal databases or whatever the strings are. And I
Mhm.
know at some point I'm going on vacation, right? So this goes back to like the same things we've dealt with before. It's like, do you have the backtrack? And if I have not given my team or people, my colleagues, the ability to edit this, then that's kind of on me because we know that there's not a solution there. So I'm gonna say that I'm gonna stop there before I keep going on, and I want to hear your thoughts about this because to me, the more I'm looking at this, this is a process solution, not a techno. We're looking at this the wrong way.
And so, in part of this, I agree with you, Tommy. Yes, it is part process. But I think the way the technology is implemented connections is not done in an easy way to incorporate the process. Right. So I agree with you. It's definitely
Yeah.
right. I mean, as we're building connections, as we're building things in workspaces, again, small, again, this is like the difference between like small projects and small projects. I'm probably less interested in managing all these little details, right? There's so much to manage there. It's up to your point, Tommy. In smaller projects, the process can take over. Did you share it with everyone on the team? Have you gone in and made a connection to something? Is there a method by which we can like so to that end? There is some need there to make it process driven. I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
But I'm also looking at going, where's the place where this becomes less friction, right? If I'm making the pipeline, I'm making the connection, I'm doing it inside the pipeline activity. Where's what on creation of the connection? Where do I assign who can use it? Where do I assign which users are supposed to be attached to that connection? So I agree with you, Tommy, but I think the technology should enforce good process around management of connections. And so I think right now what I'm saying is right now the technology today does not enforce good
Right.
process to manage the connection. And so we have to rely solely on our process to make sure the connection actually is secured the
We
right
kind of
way. We have
do.
the right
Yeah.
people access it and it's in the workspace correctly, which is fine. Again, Microsoft hasn't built it yet. I'm on the side of I'm a bit more complaining about I wish Microsoft would just give us a little bit more
Right.
features in the creation
Oh
experience
yeah.
or think about like let me say it this way, another way.
Okay. So
What if connections were managed globally like they are right now? But what if you could make a shortcut to a connection in the workspace?
I
And
was
then the shortcut to the connection is basically anyone who's in this workspace automatically gets permissions to this shortcut. Or anyone who has access to this shortcut, you could set permissions based on that. And what that does is it just exposes the connection down into the workspace, lets you manage the permissions of it. And then, another option here too, Tommy, is, maybe you don't want to use the default connection string. And one that was recently introduced which is Azure Key Vault. So
mm,
Key Vault can now hold connections, and Key Vault has a similar effect. You can
yeah.
also delegate groups and security and teams and people into that as well, and you could set that up initially and then go into having create connections there. But again, it's adding a lot more complexity. It's not
That's
outside of
adding
the scope of
so
effect.
much more
Way
complexity.
more
Yeah.
technical. I'm just saying it's another alternative out there. So it's good that we have options, but I think to your point, Tommy, like there is a process that needs to be in place at a company. Does the technology support it? I would argue right now it's not a very good support. And the other thing that was mentioned here in the question, which is, you know, um, Any advice on how to govern this? Is there any way? What was the question here towards the end? It was kind of towards the end here. Is I feel like this is a miss by Microsoft, and any creating connections is a struggle to manage. Any advice on this one? But I would also look at this going, when we expose these connections, I feel like we need to be able to. I feel like as a user, we need more flexibility.
Okay, so let's dive into this, because this is what I actually wanted to ask you. If you had this ideal user interface with the options and drop downs, what would that look like then? Right. So if we don't have it now and we're all complaining that we don't have it, then what are we looking for? What do you see on your screen that would kind of manage this for you? Because this is not, I think this is a lot harder to envision than we're saying.
So maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe I'm reading between the lines a bit too much. But when I look at this, I go, there's this concept like a workspace identity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that solves a lot of our problems here. So any user of the workspace can create. So maybe I'm thinking about this whole thing the wrong way. Maybe shortcuts to connections isn't the right way to think about this one. But maybe the idea here is, look, when we're in a workspace that is a team-based thing, maybe the right way of connecting to things is, let's first make an identity at the workspace level. And that is the identity that is then being used to manage the connection, so that anyone who has access, so the permissions of the workspace, like when I'm accessing that connection, yes, I'm doing so on behalf of the workspace. So it's like a delegated permission. I'm in the workspace. I have the right permissions to the identity, and therefore that identity allows me to see what I need to see at the connection space. So maybe I'm thinking in the world of, again, back to the technology part, right? What's maybe missing here is workspace identities, where workspace identities can be attached to a connection. And then anyone in the workspace who's a member or contributor of the different levels, you now have the ability to say, you're at the right permissions level. You can then use that identity, and therefore you can see all the connection pieces. You could update it. You could just view it. You could just use it. So maybe that's the right approach here, is to go more of that direction, as opposed to the other way that I'm thinking is, you really kind of don't, like when you get bigger solutions, when their solution gets more than just one person, you want to start removing the credentials of the user away from the data access. You want to start focusing on like app registrations and service principals and like common identities, but you still need to secure them. I don't want to be passing around a client ID and client secret to my team members to use a connection. I want it to live securely in the workspace.
And this is, to me, I think streamlining this is making more and more sense, the way connections live in Fabric, right? Again, because they have the ability to modify, create, delete, and more than just refresh. I'm leaning with you on this, where there should be a default setting, or really connections should be managed on the workspace level. You can have global connections. You can either delegate or set something that way, but by default in Fabric, again, because I can do so much. Well, if I'm going to streamline this, workspaces already are such a great security feature. What it entails is more than just a folder or a SharePoint library. We know how secure and how well workspaces work, so let's utilize that. To me, I kind of set this up where I have my workspace. I'm part of a security group, to your point, where it's like this. I'm part of the marketing dev, and all those workspaces that are marketing dev or whatever that may be are part of that access. So all those connections then should have that credentials, and that would, to me, kind of solve it, because I'm already part of that workspace. I don't need to give that connection every time I create a connection. To your point, Jim, Karen, Susie, and Mike have access. I have to do that every single time I have to create a connection. That would be idiotic, and you cannot manage that. You cannot manage the creation of that, the deletion, or the anything archival. But security groups, where I'm creating everything in the marketing, development, whatever you want to call it. As long as the workspace has access to that, I can give connections that way. We don't have the ability now to say connections are managed on the workspace level. Would be great. And I think that, to me, is the way to go. I think in the future, Microsoft, if you're listening. But if we don't have that, then I think a really good way to manage that now is that any workspace that my team's on is really part of a security or some type of group. Every workspace that I'm in is part of that group. So whatever, again, marketing dev security group has access to workspace, member, whatever you want to call it. And if I do need to create a connection, all I have to do is just simply add a new security group to it. I don't have to add 18 people. So the management's there, and I think the more we're looking into this, the more I'm seeing that security group or the group level setting is kind of the way to go, because we don't have the technology now to manage this on a way that I think we would see ideal, and we really don't want to do this on a global setting either. So to me, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing if I had a UI for this, it's really the ability to set security groups to the different connections. I hopefully should be able to see first off all the connections in my workspace, which
That's another.
that's
That
another miss.
I think that's another miss. I would agree here as well. Like the last question, how did any
Yeah.
advice on this week? Or I guess it'd be more in the middle of the question here is,
Yeah.
as an admin, I want to be able to go into the admin connection
Yes,
portal
this
and
is
say, I want to see every connection
right.
for all users because I'm the admin. Like I should be able to see
Right.
all of it. And I agree with you, Tommy, there. I think 100% that's a miss in my book. I can't see all the different connections across my whole organization. I should be able to see all of them and who has
Right.
access to them. That should be like a given.
Especially even if you're a workspace admin, I'm sorry, you should be able to have this access, because you know what's going to happen. And if it hasn't happened already, it's like the old days, man. When I remember someone, he said, I'm moving to Barcelona. His 18 reports gone. We had to build them by looking at them because we couldn't download all this stuff, which is, and the thing I don't like as much as I've been pushing the process thing,
Mhm.
is there's no netting, right, on relying on just the process alone. Because if someone doesn't follow that, there is no netting for someone who fails to do it.
Mhm.
And as much as I would push that, so kind of to round this up, if I were to say my solution here is you put as tight knit of a process you can around any time a connection is created, that has to be a part added to part of a security group, the security group that you already have access to that's already been set up. Unfortunately, with that method, is you have to understand too, there is no net if you fall, if someone fails to do that, and we don't have anything now. There really, and that's the thing to important to understand. There really is no backdrop for that if that doesn't fall, but it's kind of the best way, because what's the other way is you're giving too much access to me. You're giving too much security and you don't know who has access to it. I mean, what we can use APIs to try to look at all the connections, but again, we know we're trying to look at the things that are, I can pull it out of the box.
I mean, I'm even trying to go into the connections and the API
Yeah.
stuff. I have some projects that I've done where we have tables of data being pulled out from the APIs. I'm even trying to look at like, okay, what are all the connections that are in my tenant or things that we're connecting to? Who had the permissions to them? Even that, I'm not even sure I can even list as an API call as an admin or service principal. I'm not sure I can even list all the connections out, like even get them all out with the user permissions based on the, like, so your point, Tommy, like maybe what I'm thinking here is it would be nice to be able to have, here's all the connections of my tenant, here's all the users of them, and you could forcibly go through and say, oh, I need to make 6 new connections were added, therefore I will automatically add an admin or an admin security group to those connections. That way they can at least see everything. Right today that doesn't exist, at least that I'm aware of, or I haven't dug hard enough to go find it. It may exist, I just don't know. But to your point there, Tommy, though, like there's a missing gap here around how do we find all the connections everywhere. And as an admin, it almost feels like we need, like, sorry, I'm switching gears, thinking other thought here is, it almost feels like at the workspace level, there should be like an informational page. Like, here's all the things in your workspace, and here's all the connections that are used in this workspace and who has permissions for them. Then you could go through and just, to your point, Tommy, have a high level glance at here's all the connections we're using everywhere. And that could be part of your process, right? So now we're incorporating, I need more information back out about the workspace that will help me change my process to then make sure, hey, did you add the security group to all these connections? Look, you made 6 new connections. Those items they're not attached to a person, or they're only attached to a person, not the security group. And maybe this is where Git will help you out a bit when you make a pipeline and there's a Git connection. So you can see pipelines, see connections like being referenced in there. Maybe you can check that out and go figure out something.
It gives you the GUI though. I bet it gives you
It probably gives you the GUID. It probably
I
doesn't
don't
give
think
you the name of it.
would be great, but that is not, that's something to worth looking into as well. But
so let's see if we can wrap up on these. Like, we're kind of getting closer to time here. Maybe we can wrap up on these final thoughts here. And like, we've talked a lot about what's going on here. Okay, so I want to very clearly address how should we manage connections. I think it's, to your point, Tommy, you need to build a process.
Yeah.
There's got to be some sort of internal process that you say in your company, this is how we're going to manage these things. The technology today, I don't think gives us the full flexibility of what we would want to do from an administrative standpoint to get everything done. Now, I do think it's a good practice here to start attaching security groups to things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes sense. You can have security groups at the workspace level. You can make connections. But to your point, Tommy, if you create a new connection, it's important to note when you're creating it, making sure that you're attaching the right permissions to it so everyone can see it, because you're going to get locked out. So
Yeah.
that's just how should you manage it? Build process and try to add security groups wherever you can.
And I think that's exactly where I'm leading on this too, is if the really person's trying to ask, how do I automate this as much as possible, but also have the same security that I need? And I think you have a security group that you and your team have access to that's part of the workspace, and any new connection has to be added to that security group. All that being said, there is no backdrop to that as well. And it has to be aware to the team that there's no like, oh, well, if we don't do this, there's another way. And unfortunately, we have to understand the technology right now. The features we have are limited. So this is it. We're relying on process maybe too heavily, but that's just the way we're playing right now. That's just the those are the rules of the game. But I would completely agree with you. If connections are such an issue right now, you have to put a process around them, not just the creation, but the management of that. The best way to automate that is through adding everyone who can edit is part of that security group.
And to be clear, like when you're in the pipeline and you're clicking on a connection that exists in the pipeline somewhere, connecting to an API, connecting to something, there is no place to add like, here's the connection, here's the users that have access to this connection. Right. I would think if you're going to edit the connection, I think one of the things that would just solve a lot of this, again, this is just kind of a friction point that I have, is just add the user permissions at the time of connection creation.
Right.
Let me look, if I'm creating the connection and you're going to push me into this global connection space, just let me add the permissions. But it doesn't do that. And also, there's no like deep links either. Like it would be nice if the connections in the pipeline would deep link you over to the connection that lives inside the managed connections page.
That's another frustrating. Yeah.
Right. So it just
make it find it.
So if you're not going to, so I have to go find or go search for it. I have to go find it, go back to another page, go search for by the name, then maybe get it, and then say, okay, who's the check? So to your point, Tommy, it's the process requires too many steps at this point to make it.
So
you're overcompensating of things that should just be easier to manage, basically.
The most frustrating thing, I know we're getting on time. The most frustrating thing that makes me yell out loud is if I'm putting connections on, let's say a semantic model, and I accidentally click on the little widget icon to go to manage connections. I lose every single drop down I made of how to connection. That is an audible. Ugh.
Yeah, so, I'm frustrated. Like, what's going on here? Yeah. I agree with that one 100%. So that's another friction point that I see. And again, these are things that we've kind of observed when we work with connections. Maybe these get better over time in the future. You do have workspace identities that live today. So that is something that does exist today. You can get at those workspace identities, but again, can you add them to the connections yet? I haven't done a lot of testing around that yet. So that's an area where we'll need to spend more time researching that to get to that answer a bit more. Okay, that was the first part of the question. The second part of the question here was, is there a way to only allow certain individuals to create connections? The answer that I'm aware of is no.
No.
Everyone can create connections. If you have a PowerBI.com access, if you're a pro user, right, you can create connections and make content. Now, a viewer of a workspace can't make content, can't make connections. So viewers of workspaces, I believe, is the only way you would be able to block someone from making connections. You couldn't publish to the workspace. That's the only way, right? Because everything here hinges on creating artifacts in either Fabric or into the workspace. Right. So the only way I can think of to make sure that no individuals can make their own connections, again, so the caveat here is you can create things in the workspace, but you're not managing connections, right? That's the trade-off. Yeah. You're either going to get all or nothing. You could be a viewer on a workspace, which means you can see the content there, but now you can't create anything. And therefore, by default, you wouldn't be able to create connections. But that doesn't exclude you from going to my workspace and creating connections there, unless you turn that off too. So there's a lot of things you think you have to turn off to reduce the connections, but in doing so, you actually hinder anyone's ability to actually build anything in Power BI, which is also not what you want, right?
Yeah, because actually you brought up a good point where if I can view, well, I can't use them. I can view it. I can't use it.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
and if I can
Nor could you
edit, then
create
I
anything in
can
the
create
workspace. It just doesn't work. So yeah, I don't think there's the short answer to this one is no. You can't restrict that. There's no additional permissions of like connection creator privileges. Like there's none of that, because it basically, I mean, my opinion here, it defeats everything you're doing in the workspace pretty much.
100%.
Let me take this one step further around this creating connections things. So this is what we've been focusing is maybe the pro user in creating connections in workspaces. If you abstract that layer one level deeper and say, if your users are only creating reports, copying reports, building paginating reports, or building Power BI reports, right? If you're just
I think I know where you're going with this.
creating existing content and copying it, the only other way I know of how to do this is now you could create semantic models for people to play with, and then you can use those semantic models in embedding. That's the only thing because then you remove all the experience of Power BI.com away from them, and you're purely giving them here's the semantic model, here's the report, here's the paginated report. You're only giving them create report experiences. And when you do that, it strips away the ability for them to create anything that's fabric. It strips away the ability for create any connections. So if you, so let me, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to change my answer. Maybe, right? The answer is maybe now with lots of effort, right? So if you are giving access directly to the workspace, the answer is no. Because you can't, as soon as you turn off that ability to create connections, you turn off everything's ability.
Yeah.
If you're using Power BI embedding, now the answer is you can create catered experiences that allow users to create reporting objects and table exports, but they cannot create pipelines and do data engineering. So the data, so I guess it's there. The break line for me now is if you're creating report level content, yes, but if you're creating pipeline data engineering level content, no, because you just can't do that.
Yeah, that's yes with a lot of caveats. That's the same way as like, can I make a bolognese? Well, yes, but you do need a pig from Oscoli. you do need tomatoes. You gotta go to Naples. So, but yeah, you can do it.
You can do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a discussion here where if you don't have to worry about the view permissions on a workspace or really permissions at all on a workspace if we're dealing with the semantic model level, because then I can do that on the semantic model.
Yes.
Which is that the only artifact that we can do that with? If I'm thinking off the top of my head, where I can change the permissions, where I can build or just view. And I think this is semantic model the only one I can actually do that right now. Because if I have a pipeline, I can't give someone view permissions, right?
I'm just trying to think right now.
Yeah, I think with notebooks we can do that too. You can do the developer, the editor, or you can run it.
Notebooks can be viewed inside an org app as well. So there is this concept of like viewing a notebook, but not editing the notebook.
Artifact, I can give permissions.
Yeah, I believe when I look at the artifacts that are inside the Power BI workspace, there needs to be kind of two levels of permissioning on all the items. Right? Is there a view level version of this, or is there like a edit level of permissioning? Right. So there seems like there needs to be two layers of what's going on for permissioning for any item.
Model. Yeah.
Yes. Correct. Exactly right. So like if you come in to the item and the item must obey the workspace level of that user.
And then there's a level below it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think those are the two main questions that were asked here. Can the connections be managed? And then what's the best practices for managed connections? And then can you allow only certain individuals create connections? Not really. Not without a lot of effort. Let's just say it that way. Not without a lot of effort to build something that would make it you're managing the connections for people. And the last one, any advice on this? This is the whole episode's been roughly our advice and our pain points around this whole experience. So hopefully Microsoft, you're listening, and maybe we can, reach out. We're happy to talk about connections with you about what our experience is and how does this work. And, I'm not sure if we've been given a lot of vision for like where connections are going to go and how can we more easily manage them centrally. But man, to me, it's a big miss that there is no admin see all connections page.
I can
That
hear the
feels like it
pain.
needs to
Yeah.
exist.
I can hear the pain of Microsoft engineers if they're listening. It's like, geez, this is an issue for them too. Goodness, because I mean, here's the thing though. We've introduced so many cool features, but there are so many of these. We had these with just Power BI, these gotchas, these little things that you would never know
Paper
unless you were
cuts. Like
paper
paper
cuts.
cuts.
Yeah.
Little
Unless
tiny
you were
things that
diving
just
into the
annoy you a
pool.
little
Yeah,
bit.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Agreed. All right. That being said, thank you very much for listening to us for an hour yammer about connections. Who thought that would be such an engaging topic? But there's a lot to think about here, these connections. And as your organization goes from a small organization to a larger one, you're going to want to think or unpack your process on how you manage these. How do you handle this between different developers? And even if you're going from one developer to two, you're gonna run into this problem. Like, so even at a small team, you're going to bump into this challenge. So at least something you need to think about. That being said, thank you so much for listening. Please, if you like this episode, if you found this useful to you, share it with somebody else. We'd love to see it out shared on social media. We will definitely jump in and give you a good thumbs up for that if you do also share it. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
you can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. And please share with a friend. We do this for free. Do you have a question, idea, or topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Well, head over to powerbi.tip/podcast. Leave your name and a great question like today. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of PowerBI.tip's social media channels.
Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.